All right, we start out with board has a land acknowledgement statement and anti-racist statement online. We do the roll call tonight. Everyone is here. Sonia, AJ Schindler, and Josh Collins. Sonia and AJ absences. Item number 1 tonight is the adoption. Sorry if I get a motion.
Move to adopt.
Yeah, someone's going to reread. You get a second? Thank you, Lori. All in favor? Unanimous. Item number 2 is the consent agenda tonight. We have 2A, 2B, 2C, and 2D. 2A is meeting minutes from November 2nd, 2023. 2B is minutes November 4th, 2023 for the AGM. 2C was minutes November 6th, 2023, and 2D is the minutes for November 16th, 2023.
Mr. President,
Yes.
I need to remove 2C, the minutes from November 6th. There's an error in it, but the others are fine.
Anybody else have any additional comments on the minutes? Does anyone have a problem with removing 2C minutes from November 6, 2023? And can we get approval for 2A, 2B, and 2D?
Motion to approve 2A, 2B, and 2D.
You get a second?
Don't need one.
Second.
All in favor? That's unanimous tonight for many of us.
I'd like to announce that there are 2 important events coming up for Sudden Valley Holiday Makers on Saturday. In the morning, there is Breakfast with Santa at El Agave. What time does that start, Amy?
9 o'clock, I believe.
Yeah.
At 9 a.m. So
No reservations needed. It's a free event sponsored by El Agave. Bring your family. There will be crafts. There'll be pictures with Santa and Mrs. Santa. And just, it's a free event. Just everybody come on down and have a great time.
awesome. And then to round off the day at 5 p.m., we'll have a first annual Sudden Valley Christmas tree lighting right outside the barn in our new green space. And the tree is quite something to be seen. So come on down. We'll have cocoa and cookies in the dance barn afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. Any other announcements? All right, hearing none, we'll move on to item number 4, property owner comments. Are there any property owner comments tonight? Please come up, state your name, address.
My name's Colleen Mitchell. I live at, I forget my lot number, so 19 Meadow Court.
Colleen, can you get right up to the mic?
Yes, okay. I timed this out. So at first I wanted to thank the board for volunteering to your time to do this important work for the community, and thank staff for all the things that they do. I approached the board in the public comment portion, excuse me, before I begin. I'm joined this evening by Carr Lanham of Washington State Traffic Safety Commission in support of this topic. I approached the board in public comment portion about a year ago asking that Sudden Valley review its policies surrounding safety at bus stops after watching a speeding vehicle pass right through an open paddle at our Huckleberry bus stop. I did not get a response. In passing, someone told me that safety at 37 bus stops was just too much to address in any meaningful way. I've spent the year exploring resources to help with safety practices and tools in order to present them to Sudden Valley. My journey began with the school transportation and the county sheriff, Bellingham PD, leading to our senator's offices to understand why Sudden Valley couldn't enforce its speeding and traffic laws on private property, etc. The Whatcom County Sheriff's Department directly told me State law prohibits them to enforce anything other than felony crimes within our gates, meaning it's up to the HOA. I was referred to the State of Washington Traffic Safety and connected with Washington State Traffic Safety Commission Target Zero Manager, Carl Lanham. He offered potential traffic safety and bus stop strategies via a public awareness campaign for social media and other that Sudden Valley could implement. This proposal included graphics for safety signage near and around school bus stops, et cetera. Many of the school months are dark when the smallest children and caregivers are heading to bus stops. You see my lighted coat today. This is actually cute, but it's functional. This is what we wear with my 6-year-old to walk to the bus stop so that we're visible, because it is so dark and because we've had so many instances being passed by speeding cars on Polo Park. I wanted to focus on bus stop area safety to open a general conversation of overall pedestrian and traffic safety here in Sudden Valley. I hope that beginning with an overall safety and awareness campaign could begin a broader conversation of how we can address our lack of traffic safety enforcement. We have record number of permanent multi-car residents in developed lots. If the average home has 2 to 3 cars, imagine. With that amount of traffic, no sidewalks, children heading to bus stops, folks walking their dogs or jogging, we're left with multiple risk factors for potentially disastrous events. I wrote the board in September of this year asking if CAR could have audience with the SVCA to discuss the school bus safety issues as it relates to possible enforcement, engineering, and educational solutions. I'm here again asking if the Sudden Valley Community Association look at possible solutions. I think it's important that the board of directors and the general manager be involved and committed to the topic of school bus safety and the overarching concerns of the community and general pedestrian and traffic safety. CAR could be an amazing resource for a primary effort in raising awareness via communicating with residents strategically. I have watched cars pass open paddles at bus stops, pass buses on Lake Louise, speed through stop signs, speed down the roads, nearly missing folks over and over and over. A place this large with this many cars does need some kind of involvement of its governing organization, and that can begin with raising traffic safety awareness via education. This is where the SVCA can most effectively participate as a primary step. I know Sudden Valley has big concerns to address, but I can't think of any more important than the safety of our children and residents. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Colleen. Appreciate that. So do you have a business card with you? Okay, I'll reach out to Colleen. Thank you. Appreciate your time. Any other comments tonight? Hearing none.
Sure, I forgot one, so I'm going to put this in the member comments. Sam Shahan, 1 Whistling Swan Place. I would like to comment on snow season and safety on our roads, following up with Colleen because she kind of brought that up and about the school buses and keeping our mailbox areas clear of cars that aren't capable of traveling on our snow roads. And by not having those cars parked at the mailboxes, open space for us to use some of our new equipment for clearing the snow in those. And we can truly keep those clear and de-ice so nobody's falling on their rears and or slipping. And it's been noted that certain rubber boots, people have actually slipped with those and break ankles, elbows, hips, and that's our members. And so keeping that clear so we can de-ice that is important. So those cars, anybody out there, remind your other young drivers and other folks that if you have a car that's not capable of moving, it's not an excuse to leave it there blocking those. They need to be out of there for safety issues for all of us. And also those cars, once they get parked and stuck there, it makes it impossible for the mail to be delivered. And then that affects people's delivery of critical mail for a lot of people. They get meds and things in the mail, important items that they need. And when you block that out, and then people complain about the post office, and it's not the post office, it's us. And so I would recommend that all residents respect each other and do everything possible to keep your cars out of there. If your car's not satisfactory for out here, figure that out, but don't leave them there because we end up having accidents in those things and people knocking over mailboxes. And it's a shame that we're doing that because that's a lack of respect for your neighbors. And another big factor is for everyone, including staff and the postal service, is the safety of those things. When we can't get that ice out of there, they're falling down. We're creating a hazardous work area for these people, and we're responsible for that. And so I encourage everyone to learn about traction tires and park some of those cars. I got a car I probably shouldn't drive around in the snow stuff, and I'll have to park that thing. And I feel bad about that, but I've got a different car. And for everyone that doesn't, it's like that's not an excuse to drive an improper car and that stuff and then put it in everybody's way. And it creates very dangerous, hazardous situations. So I appreciate if all the residents would respect those areas.
Thank you, Sam. I appreciate that. Any other comments tonight?
I was just going to say, Joanne, I understand from, this is on Facebook, but I understand ice melt is available at the Welcome Center. Is that correct?
Yes, we have Purple Heat Ice Melt at the Welcome Center. It's a magnesium chloride blend of salt. It's considered to be safer and more effective. It's difficult to find Purple Heat locally unless you buy it by the pallet, which is what we do. It's 50 bags. We're selling it at a reduced price. We're not making any money on it at all. In case people wonder, it's $15 total. That includes sales tax, and you can pick it up at the Welcome Center between 9 and 4 any day, Monday through Friday.
Do they have to call ahead at all?
No, it's just there.
Thank you.
I
also
left
posted
something
this.
out on my member comment, and it's important. I forgot to mention Judy White sent in a notice. I have been preaching about the mailbox clearing in those areas quite a bit, but she sent something in, and I wanted to thank her for sparking that. So I'll bringing that up also because what Colleen said and what Judy White said. So thank you, Judy.
Thank you, Sam.
Oh, as a follow-up to Director Shahan's remarks, I'd like to remind everyone that we did release the snow plan this past week. Last Friday, it went out. There was a link to a video presentation. You can also see just a printout of the presentation that includes maps where you can identify whether your road is a primary, secondary, or residential road. That determines the order of plowing. It's also noted in there that we will tow cars that are in the way of the mailboxes or that cause a significant hazard. Now, unfortunately, no tow companies are coming out here if there's 6 or more inches of snow on the road and there's ice. So it's a double whammy. At the very time when we can't clear the cars, we need them cleared most. So don't drive if you don't have good traction. Don't think you can get out if you're not really sure, because you won't get back. Thanks.
Thank you, Joanne. Any additional comments? All right, hearing none, we'll move on to board orientation activities tonight, which is item number 5. We'll hand that off to Rich Davies for the legal presentation. Thank you, Rich.
Okay. I'm gonna share my screen. Okay. Let me get.
You
is
need
that
to
feedback?
mute your machine.
You got to mute.
Figure it out. Okay. And then I need to share screen. Okay. Slideshow. From the beginning. Okay, well, thank you. I think I got it worked out here. So, appreciate those of you who've heard me give it before. There's not going to be a lot that's new. I do have a few things that I've changed. As you know, or if you're new to the board, then you don't know, but this is a mix of legal principles. So I want to make sure that the new board members hit the ground running with some basic principles. But I also want to kind of go over some principles about your role as a board member on this board. Sometimes people have not served on boards previously, or they have only served on one. It's been a while ago, and it's not an intuitive process. And so what I have learned over the years are just some basic things that can help a board, in my view, function more efficiently. Now, keep in mind that that's not legal advice, and so you all may have different opinions, and we can talk about it. But this presentation is kind of a mix of things. And so the first part we'll get into just the legal things you need to know as a director, and then we'll go on to the other part. Now, before I start, I always like to kind of say what my assumptions are when I give a presentation like this, because there are things that I say from time to time and that people think that I'm talking about them. I don't want this to be a presentation about any specific things that anybody has done at Sudden Valley. This is not about any one person. This is just general principles. And if I'm asked to give this presentation to other clients, which I do, I say the same thing. This is kind of, there are just some core principles here that are unique to every HOA and every board. My first assumption is everyone here is here to make Sun Valley a better place to live. I can't imagine anybody who would want to spend the time and effort to serve on the board in a volunteer fashion who's not got that, who doesn't have that desire in mind. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. Usually there's no thanks or very little thanks to the job. So I have to assume that. I also assume that everybody here is interested in a well-run HOA, just like the staff. Everybody wants this place to function well. Question is, how do we do that? What are our proper roles? I also assume that there's room for improvement. Whether you've been on the board a long time, a short time, there's always room for improvement. Same with staff, same with the general manager. There's always room to learn something and do something better. Understand that being here on the board is not an intuitive process. It's going to require some thought as to process, and that's what I'm going to help with on the second part of the presentation. Now, directors need to realize this is an important role that you have. You are the leaders of the association. People will look up to you as leaders. Things that you say, they will be listening more closely than they would to someone who's not a director. So that is your position now as a director. And as I said before, some of this is legal advice and some of it's not. I'll make sure to let you know what isn't. So, and again, it's meant to be interactive. So if you have things you want to comment on or ask questions, feel free to do so. I've kind of dealt with these issues here. And so I'm going to move on to legal concepts. What is Sudden Valley? So you are two different things under Washington law. First of all, and foremost, you're a homeowners association. There is an act called the Homeowners Association Act, which you can find at RCW 6438. It's sandwiched in between the old Condominium Act and the new Condominium Act, and then you've got the WCOYA that comes after that. And WCOYA is the newest of the acts that govern community associations. Your legal standing here as a homeowners association. So when I talk about the Homeowners Association Act, you can read that at that statutory site. The other thing that you are is you're incorporated with the state of Washington as a nonprofit corporation. The Nonprofit Corporation Act was amended about 2 years ago. It was overhauled. It wasn't really amended. It was kind of thrown out, and a new act came in and replaced it. So you can find that now at RCW 2403A. I will refer to both of these throughout the presentation, and I may also refer to WCOYA because WCOYA applies to Sudden Valley. Again, that's our newest law. It applies only with respect to the budget, however. So what it did is it amended the budgetary process for every HOA in the state. It says essentially that the board of directors has to adopt a proposed budget, and then that budget is ratified unless more than 50% of all members at a meeting reject it. So the vote is really a ratification vote that in the case of Sudden Valley with so many members, so many voting members, it would be very, very difficult of 10 units, much more likely that a budget could be rejected.
But does Washington state law trump our bylaws?
Yes, so Washington state law would trump any of your governing documents. If there's an inconsistency, the law would govern. So I mentioned the statutes here. In addition to the statutes that apply to Sudden Valley, you've got court decisions. Sudden Valley's been involved in a few court decisions over the years. The most recent one was actually the one that caused this budget provision of Wacoya to be inserted. The legislature reacted to a case that Sudden Valley won a few years back, which upheld the previous to Wacoya. What Sudden Valley did is they approved a budget and then they had a separate vote to approve the assessments. At the Court of Appeals level, we prevailed, and the court found that was fine. It was in compliance with the statute. Homeowners associations throughout the state were riled by that. They felt that associations might change their governing documents to have that two-step process. They lobbied the legislature, and when the legislature passed this new law, it made it very easy for budgets to be approved by the membership because of the high threshold for rejection. But there are court decisions that involve Sudden Valley and others that we refer to from time to time to tell you what what's legal and what isn't legal. Those court decisions are all appellate decisions. So when you have a case here in Superior Court, over in Whatcom County Superior Court, we don't cite to those. Those are not precedential, but when they get appealed up to the Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court, that's the kinds of decisions that we're talking about. The next level of authority is your governing documents. You have the Articles of Incorporation, which we don't refer to very often, but they're there. That was the document that formed Sudden Valley and incorporated it. We have bylaws. We have the covenants, which are recorded against each of the lots in Sudden Valley. And then you have rules and regulations. So those comprise your governing documents. And then the question sometimes arises, well, what controls? Sometimes we have conflicts. They're not intentional, obviously, but sometimes there are. In that case, if you just start at the top of this page and work your way down, that's the level of priority. So you've got the statutes followed by common law decisions. Our governing documents are subordinate to both of those. So that's kind of the priority if there's a conflict. And this, in terms of our governing documents, you sometimes will have conflicts, internal conflicts. If that happens, then, and one of the governing documents I didn't mention is your plat map. There's a plat map for each division. So the priority here is from the top down, the plat map controls first, then you go to the CC&Rs, the Articles of Incorporation, and the bylaws, then any rules and regulations adopted by the board, and finally any policies.
Rich, just a question.
Yeah.
Could you give me an example of where the plat map would have a greater priority than, say, CC&Rs or Articles of Incorporation? I mean, it's a.
In the case of Sudden Valley?
Yeah.
I don't know that there is a conflict, or that there would be a conflict in Sudden Valley, but some plat maps, and if you were to pull up different associations throughout the county, you'll see that some plat maps are very detailed, and they have language on the face of the plat map, quite detailed notes. So that would take priority if you had, but Sudden Valley doesn't really have much. There's some language about keyways, I believe, and really not much else. So that's unlikely you're unlikely to find a conflict there.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll first of all talk about committees. Sudden Valley has what are called standing committees, and these are found in the bylaws. And these are the standing committees that are listed there: architectural control, nominations and elections, finance, executive, appeals, and document review. Standing committees are in the bylaws, so those are permanent committees. That's what it means to be a standing committee, unless the bylaws are changed. The purposes of standing committees in general is to do tasks that otherwise the full board would have to do. For instance, you have an appeals committee. It's formed when there is an appeal, but it performs a review process that if you didn't have that committee, the full board would have to undertake that task. The other thing that that a committee may do is it may do research and background work and then make recommendations to the board about certain actions. And a good example of that would be your document review committee that goes through your bylaws from time to time, makes recommendations to the board about what ought to be changed in order to improve the bylaws. When committees, although committees are referenced in the bylaws and they are kind of standalone bodies, the board ultimately is responsible for every committee at the end of this association. So you're responsible. We're responsible for NNE, we're responsible for ACC, all of these committees. And so if a committee were to overstep its bounds or were to do something that would put Sun Valley at legal risk, the board would have an obligation to step in and try and correct that. Rules can be adopted for each of the committees. It is up to the board to do that. The board, however, does have the right to approve any of the rules, and that's according to that bylaw section that's mentioned there.
Rich, just another question. In terms of committees, so the board has oversight of the standing committees, but in the case of, say, like NNE, does it have some autonomy to do the work within that's mentioned within the bylaws of what its work is?
It has autonomy to do the duties that are set forth in the bylaws. But again, if the NNE committee were to, let's say, and I'm not saying this has happened, but if they were to go rogue and do something that is contrary to the bylaws or contrary to law, then the board would have an obligation to correct that.
Thank you.
Do you know if the committee members, or maybe it's for the insurance guy, are covered by our insurance?
They are, but you can, is your insurance guy here tonight?
He will be presenting
Okay.
later, and last year he answered that question, and the answer is yes. They are
Answer is
covered.
what?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, so you've got the standing committees. Those are set forth in the bylaws. The board has the right to create ad hoc committees, and those are committees that are created just for a specific function. Maybe you've got a new issue that's come up. It really entails a lot of research and discussion. And so you create a committee to look at the issue and to come back to the board and make a recommendation. If an ad hoc committee it turns into kind of a permanent committee, if it never goes away, then you ought to think about amending the bylaws and making that a standing committee. Because ad hoc committees really are supposed to be project by project, type of committees. When you create an ad hoc committee, it's important because you don't have the bylaw provisions to govern that committee. You really do need to take the time to define the scope of that committee. What are they supposed to do? How long should they be in existence? Maybe it should be for the duration of the project, but they should have some sunset in case they don't get their work done timely. Some procedural rules to govern the committee, and also let the committee know what are the deliverables. What do we expect you to bring back to us? Is it a written report? Is it just to come back and give an oral report at the next board meeting? What is it that you're supposed to do? That is beneficial to the committee members who want some guidance so that they know what they have to come back and give to the board. You should, I think, preserve the right at any time to disband these committees if for some reason they're not functioning as you intended them. Again, this is with ad hoc committees. You can't do that with standing committees. And then I would encourage the board to seek committee members who are open-minded about a particular issue so you get, to the extent possible, kind of unbiased views. You should get a difference of opinion so they have debate within the committee, but get people who are interested about it and willing to think outside the box. Okay, we'll turn to the board of directors now. And a lot of this is not legal advice, but I want to just go over this because these are important concepts as a director. Again, you're a leader in the organization. That means when you say something, you're in a board meeting, out in the community, on social media, people are looking up to you, and your words mean more than just an ordinary member of the association. People know that you are part of the board, and so it's an important role. Again, it's volunteer, so all of the work, none of the glory. In fact, you'll find if you're new to the board that this is often a thankless kind of task. It's unfortunate, but you don't get the credit that you deserve. It's hard work, and there's a lot of things that you accomplish. It's easy for people in the community to criticize, but the accolades are few and far between for the most part. So that's just the way it is, and it's that way in every association. It's not just Sudden Valley. Directors need to focus on governance as opposed to management. And I'll talk a lot about what that means, but because your time is limited, respect and dignity. And it's super important to do that. If you don't establish a culture by design, you'll establish it by default, and that's usually not a good thing. I'll have a little bit more to say about that on a future slide. Here's the legal part of your job as a director. You have some duties. First of all, you have to exercise the degree of care and loyalty required of an officer or director of a nonprofit corporation. Great. That is a circular kind of definition. But what it really means is, number one, you've got a fiduciary duty. So you have to act in good faith, right? You have to, you can't be conflicted. If you have a financial interest or something, you would have to disclose that and recuse yourself from discussion. So you have to act in good faith. You have to act with the care that an ordinarily prudent person would act in a similar circumstance. So that may mean you need to rely upon the assistance of consultants like a lawyer, an accountant, or an engineer, or somebody who's got some expertise in order to make a well-informed decision. And you have to act in a manner that you reasonably believe to be in the best interests of the corporation. Now, people are going to have different views of that. You are going to disagree on issues, and that's totally fine. That's still fulfilling your fiduciary duty, but that is your job. One thing that I think is important to know is that people have kind of a base of support when they run for a position on the board. But when you get to this position and you're on the board, you represent the entire community. You're working for the entire community, and you're supposed to act in the best interests of the entire community. One of the newer duties that directors have, and this is in the nonprofit corporation when it was amended, is a duty of disclosure. So essentially, it means that if you know of something that would be material to the board's duties, you know, it might be a situation where you know that liability, you know, the association might have liability, or that it would violate the law or something like that. You have a duty to disclose that to the board so that the board can take that issue up and deal with it. Yeah, that's enough on that. And so one of the ways that you protect yourself from liability, because you can be sued as a director. The good news is you have insurance. You're covered. It's called directors and officers insurance, but you can be sued. The way to protect yourself is under a doctrine known as the business judgment rule. And that means if there's an area of specialization that's needed to make an informed decision, you're entitled to rely upon that. So when I give you a memo, for instance, I assume none of you are lawyers. And if that's the case, you can rely upon what I say. Even if I'm wrong and you make a bad decision because of my bad advice, you're still protected because you relied upon an expert who is able to provide that kind of advice. So just to summarize, what's your standard of care? Act with the same care as a reasonably prudent person would in a similar circumstance. When you need to, when there is areas of specialization beyond your knowledge, retain outside expertise to make a well-informed decision. Disclose to the board information that's relevant to the board's roles. And finally, understand the issues and risks of action or failing to act before moving to a vote. Okay, so and this here is also legal advice, and this is kind of what a kind of the appropriateness of a board meeting. So first of all, you have to have a few minimum requirements for board meetings. Number one, in order to take any action, you have to have a quorum. So you have to have a majority of the directors. No action can be taken unless it's approved by a majority of those present. So if it's a tie vote, if you have 6 members here and it's a tie vote, then it fails. Okay? You have to comply with your scheduled meeting notice requirements. If for some reason notice is not appropriately given, the best advice would be just don't have the meeting. Okay? And finally, you need to prepare minutes. And minutes should be approved at the following board meeting unless there's a reason why it needs to wait because you need to correct them or something like that. But minutes need to be prepared in order to document the formal actions of the corporation. And usually just a one-time yes or no on something. We're going to approve a contract, we're going to pay a bill, something of that nature. A resolution is something that's usually a little more permanent in nature. And you'll see that resolutions start out with providing some context, whereas, blah, 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 whereas. And what that does is kind of laying the groundwork for how we got here and what we are going to do from this point forward. For instance, if we have a records policy, we would have some whereases like the law says that we have to provide records to members. We have limited staff and we need a process in place to ensure that records are given to members. So that's your context. And then the resolution is kind of permanent in nature. We're adopting a policy here that is going to have some permanence. That's kind of the difference between a motion and a resolution, but the effect is the same.
Question for you. Yeah, regarding records, the Washington law 6438.045 regarding records, that would trump then our bylaw.
It would if there's a conflict. If there's a conflict between I'm not sure of a bylaw provision that conflicts with that statute.
I'm not sure. I wanted to be clear which one.
Yeah, the statute would control. Yeah.
Thank you.
And then one thing that you need to do to make meetings run smoothly is to have parliamentary rules that you go by. It can be Robert's Rules of Order, and I think your bylaws provide for that. It's not required under the law, but it certainly makes the meetings go more efficiently, and it allows everybody a chance to talk, and it just provides consistent treatment of the board members. So, okay, what about remote or in-person meetings? The Nonprofit Corporation Act says unless your articles or bylaws say otherwise, you can conduct a meeting by any remote communication means where all directors can simultaneously participate. So a Zoom meeting satisfies that requirement. That's what the Nonprofit Corporation Act says. It allows you to have remote meetings, but your bylaws are more restrictive and they say remote meetings are allowed in exceptional circumstances. Now, what I mean by remote is everybody's absent. Everybody's attending by Zoom. So there is no in-person component to the meeting. So your bylaws are a little bit more restrictive in this case. When your bylaws are more restrictive in this situation, I know what the question, I'm anticipating the question here, your bylaws would govern.
Quick question, Kevin. Would that can't cover closed sessions?
So you can have when you go into closed session, you can still meet remotely. Is that the question?
Yeah.
That you can. I do urge, and I think I've got it on a later slide, that you ensure that everybody who's in attendance is there alone. And they don't have other people in the room because what you're talking about are confidential matters. And it's a good idea just to ensure that it's just the board members on the Zoom. Okay, so for open session, the law requires that those be open for observation by owners and their agents, unless you have a reason to go into closed session. And in addition to that, all ACC meetings are to be open for observation, according to that bylaw that's cited. The ACC committee could have a closed work session if the policies were revised. I didn't see anything in the policies right now that would allow that. But again, committees, standing committees like this have the right to propose changes in the policies. As long as they're approved by the board, they can be changed.
I have a question. The ACC committee, we do have tours where we discuss, we'll visit the properties and talk about things before we actually go to the properties. It's a standing meeting Tuesdays before the actual meeting, open meeting. And it is open to, the residents and I guess anybody who wants to be there. But at this point, it's generally just our committee. We get together and we take a tour, and it's kind of closed. But I mean, as we come to the properties, we do meet with the owners. So it seems like that's a bit of a gray area, and I'm not sure the best way to handle that.
It's awkward, and public agencies have the same kind of thing from time to time, where they have they have to notice a meeting even if they're getting together for like a banquet, because they may discuss business of the government, and that has to be open. So this is kind of a funny kind of meeting, but it is open. I mean, if I'm a member of the community and I know about that, I can hang around and hear what's going on. I think you're meeting the intent of the statute and the bylaws by doing that. Now, if you excluded, so if I showed up and you said, hey, you can't be here, then that would be a problem.
Okay.
So if we were to post the meeting along with a description and a date, a standing day and time, that would be adequate notice?
Yes, it would.
And are meeting minutes required for that?
Minutes have to be kept of all meetings. Yes.
Okay.
But there's no action that's taken during. Right. So the minutes.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So no action is taken. So the minutes don't really say much other than meeting was held and attended by. You can list the committee members who were there. That's kind of the end of it. Minutes don't have to be very detailed. I mean, what they should reflect is the action that's taken. That's the bare minimum. Well, the bare minimum is the fact that there's a quorum, and secondly, what was the action that was taken? That's what
no action is taken. It's just consultation with residents.
Yeah, so they can be very skinny, but you should have minutes that reflecting what the committee did.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Rich, kind of following up with ACC board meetings, those are required to be open per our bylaws. Some of the other committees so I'm a little bit confused. So N&E, all of ours are open, and maybe that's best practice. I'm not saying it shouldn't be, but do our bylaws only reflect board and ACC being open?
I can't recall as I sit here. I'd have to go back to the bylaws and look. I believe there might be a provision that requires N&E to be open, but I don't recall offhand.
Yeah.
I just have to read them to find out.
Yeah, I'm not pushing back. I was just, it might be just a best practice, but at one point, our community several years ago went to any committee that met. We were open and used Zoom, but it just caught my attention. Thank you.
And then finally, this is kind of just a best practice, avoid offline meetings. And what I mean by that are, I kind of have in mind serial meetings, because I deal with a lot of governments and they're governed by the Open Public Meetings Act, which is similar, frankly, to the provisions here in RCW 6438. It just means don't, have a series of email discussions between board members, because that frankly is, when you have a discussion of a quorum of the board, that's essentially a meeting. The Homeowners Association Act doesn't say that. We don't have a case. But again, the requirements for meetings for an HOA are very similar to those for governments. And so I think it's a best practice to avoid those kind of offline meetings. it really erodes trust in the community when they find out that decisions are being made and discussions are being made without involving all directors and kind of behind the scenes. Closed sessions are the time where you, of that portion of the meeting where you can go to a different room and exclude the membership. In order to go to closed session, you have to have an affirmative vote of the board that's taken in the open part of the meeting. And the motion has to include an authorized purpose, which I have on the next slide. I do want to say, though, when you get into closed session, keep it limited to the matters that you're supposed to be there for. So if it's a personnel issue or if it's a legal matter you're discussing with your attorney, just limit it to that. It's tempting sometimes to go off on a tangent, but again, those kinds of things erode the trust in the board if the membership ever finds out. You do not take any motions in closed session. So if there's a motion to be made, you have to come out into closed session and take it in open session. But what you can do sometimes is you'll have a consultant who's meeting with you in closed session. You may just give them direction. And that's particularly true with attorneys. A lot of times we'll go into closed session, we'll tell you about a potential litigation or active litigation, let's say, give advice and get some direction for, yeah, we should file a motion to dismiss that case or whatever the case may be. We don't want to bring that motion in open session so that everybody knows our strategy, but you've given direction to the lawyer about what to do. That's entirely appropriate. Okay, so why can you go into closed session? This slide lists the reasons. And by the way, I can email this around. Joanne can send a copy to each of you afterwards. But personnel matters are appropriate for a closed session. You generally want to discuss those matters anyhow, even if you didn't have a statute. Those matters are generally confidential, right? And people's privacy is at issue. Consulting with legal counsel for any reason. It doesn't have to be litigation. It can be anything at all. You can discuss a memo that you get from me. I don't even have to be present for you to have that discussion in closed session. If you want to talk about litigation, whether it's potential or it's already pending, that's okay. That I get on this. Do you prepare minutes for closed session? No. That would defeat the purpose of maintaining confidentiality. There are no minutes. You can take personal notes if you want for your own personal, to remember things that were said and what you're doing, but no minutes. Can a board member participate by telephone? And the answer is yes. But I just recommend that you verify that the person who's speaking, particularly if they're on a speakerphone, that they're the only person in the room, so you can guarantee confidentiality. You can bring in third parties to a closed session. That doesn't violate the fact that you're in closed session. So the general manager oftentimes is there to facilitate the discussion. You may have other members of your staff or consultants as necessary. That's all fine. And then finally, can a board member disclose confidential information that they get in closed session? The answer to that is a very firm no. You have an obligation. This goes back to your duties to the association. When you get confidential information, as a director, that information, you got to keep it confidential. It's just, and the other thing about that is, aside from like your legal duties, maintaining confidentiality really helps facilitate a good, open, candid discussion in closed session. People are reserved when there are leaks, and it's happened before. It's happens everywhere in government. It happens in other associations. Sometimes there are leaks. And then people who go into closed session are like, well, I don't know if I can really speak my mind here because I don't want this information out in public. I don't know who I can't trust. There's somebody on this board I can't trust. And that's not good. So,
Rich, I have a quick question. I know in the past when you have given us opinions about stuff, the board can vote to ask to release those in case it would benefit the community at large to know it, correct?
Sure. So when I write you a memo, it's covered by the attorney-client privilege, and I don't have any right to disclose that. But it's your privilege. It's the association's privilege. So if you wish to waive it because you want the membership to see it, for whatever reason, you're entitled to do that. But it should be waived by the board by a formal vote, just so there's a record of the waiver. Again, don't be tempted to leak confidential communications. I think I've covered that. I think I've covered that adequately. You can also use closed session to deliberate in closed session for for appeals. And you may invite staff and legal counsel in to help assist with the deliberations or to offer factual information. So appeal hearings are a perfect opportunity for closed session. Although at Sudden Valley, the way it works is if the appellant wants to be in open session, they have an absolute right to have the hearing in open session. Typically, then the appeals committee would retire to closed session to have their deliberations. Okay, so now we get to the part of the presentation where you all get to participate a little bit. And I enjoy hearing answers to some of these questions. But it's also not just for me, it's for the benefit of each of you to understand a little bit more about each other. So let me, hopefully we can, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I would like to know, why did various people become a director here at Sudden Valley? It's not the money, I know that. Okay, so there's other reasons. Anybody want to, yeah, Sam?
Yes, I became a director because I was actually working for a while for the association as in the maintenance, and I was disillusioned about what was going on and how the work was going, and I wanted to see better results for the time spent that we were working, and so I ended up pursuing that and doing something about it, I guess. And so I just couldn't take it. I just kept checking on it, and next thing I know, I kept showing up around the meetings, and there you go. You keep showing up, and you end up there. So that's how I ended up on the board, because there was something I totally was upset with, and decided to do something about it. And everybody pitched in actually, and turned that stuff around to where they actually were getting a better bang for the buck.
People want to serve on the board. They feel like they can make a difference and improve the community. You got to keep that in mind. Every one of you have that aim here. You may not agree on things every time, and there's going to be winners and losers on various votes. You'll see things differently, but you're all here for a common reason. That's why you're spending your time that you could be at home watching the debates, or, well, I guess that was last night, but whatever. Okay. So let me ask this now. What gives you the most satisfaction as a board member? Newer board members may not have enough, mileage yet to know, but those who've been around a bit, what gives you satisfaction?
I'll go again. Actually, I was really quite satisfied when I seen some of those projects that I didn't think were getting done or were even being looked at, that we turned that around and actually got bids and started doing some of those major projects, and we spent some money on it, but then they were completed, and it's work that looks really good for decades, and that really made me feel a lot better, because that's exactly why I wanted to get on the board, to make that work hold up.
I actually see tangible results. Anybody else?
I think what I would add is I like being part of teams. I like teaming on things to try to improve things, but also for the common good. We don't always agree on things, but to have good, respectful debate is a good thing. If, like what you said, Rich, if all of us sitting here coming from the same point of view with the, you know, we already had all the answers figured out, we, result would not be healthy.
Yeah. Thanks for those answers. That's helpful. I think a lot of board members, they get a sense of pride and from seeing things accomplished, you know, actually having some big challenging projects and seeing them to fruition. That's usually a source of great satisfaction to board members. There you go. Yeah. Let's make it happen. Is there anything you'd like to see changed or improved? We've got some new board members, so this is where you get to, you obviously ran for the board for a reason. Everything's fine.
Well, I think we always have things we want to change, and we have a new board, and I think we're just all excited to just move on and have a really good year.
All right.
Every board's going to have a different perspective.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I would like, I have an opinion on everything and usually willing to express it. I think that we have really good, there's lots of detailed financial information out there. I think that it would be good to see it condensed in a more of an executive summary, if you would, so that the members of the community can digest it and not feel like they need a degree in financial management or something to better understand it. I know when I've talked to my neighbors, like, Rob, could we just have kind of a summary of some of the data? I'm not criticizing anybody at all. It's just that I think it would be better if we had a summary.
No, thank you. And now the question that you've all been waiting for, because this is this is one that is always it gets a lot of different responses from different people. But I know that Sudden Valley has a kind of a robust social media outlet. They're not official social media sites of Sudden Valley, although I understand you have a Facebook site, but there are other social media sites. And the question is, what role does social media play in a director's service as a director? What do you think? People must have opinions on this.
To not be on social media while being a director, just my opinion.
Okay. Anybody else feel differently?
I'm going to come on the opposite side of that.
Well, unless you're being positive.
The last time I answered a question of one of the members about what the dues were for developed lot owners, of negative stuff, but there's times where stuff shows up on social media where someone will talk about an issue, doesn't do them any good unless they either say something to the board or I then go, hey, I'm seeing this on social media. Recently, we asked for volunteers to sign up for online forms. I'll give this example. People were saying, I get an error. So I took my personal email, did a test, sent it to Joanne, and she said it's working. But at least if I see something like that, I feel I can take a look at it and put some value to it and hopefully make it better somehow so that it comes out positively.
Anybody else?
Sure. At times I was, I did get off of social media because I found it combative at times. So I shifted my strategy on that, apologized to some folks and shut that off. But then what I had been doing was a quick scan of various pages of new posts. And at times I found some things that they said about certain things that they saw or experienced in a physical manner out there in our infrastructure. And so there's times I would see that and I didn't comment on it. I just went to look. I would go out and actually look at that very thing, and sometimes crawling in ditches, and been known to do that quite a bit out here. And so I crawl in the holes and look around when somebody says something. And then if I saw something too, and then I might ask somebody, the general manager or the maintenance, and in a quick question about that, because there was some times I found some things that it didn't get splashed all over the place, but it just went directly to a couple of people, and said I saw merit in that, and it was a safety issue thing. That's like, and so that's pretty much what I had always been doing too, was everything was a basic human safety issue that somebody could get hurt. And so, and then I would take a quick look at it, but that's what I've narrowed it down to, is occasional scan of that.
It is a good way to kind of get the temperature a little bit of the association, although you have to be careful. Depends on the form that is being used. And, there's a lot of negativity there, and getting sucked into social media debates is usually not a constructive strategy. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but I did want to get kind of your input on that. So thank you for indulging me in that. Let me move on here. I don't want to usurp all your time tonight. So barriers to a well-functioning board. There are a number of reasons why a board might not function well. And this is not a commentary on this board, but there's always room for improvement. And over the years, I've noticed things that are barriers, such as resentments. A lot of times it's interpersonal conflicts that can just affect people's objective, unbiased views of the issues that are being discussed. So it could be personal attacks that are made here at a board meeting or outside a board meeting, and people don't get over that stuff, and it really does affect them long term. Another reason is individual members don't respect their roles as directors. I'll talk a bit about freelancing. And so what that means is you start doing things on your own rather than bringing issues back to the board. Freelancing. I view that as kind of a problem for the board, because the other board members are like, well, why weren't we advised? Why don't we have, why weren't we given the chance to address this issue? Lack of respect. There has to be mutual respect amongst the board members to function well. It's just essential. And then failing to realize, and this is important, sometimes and we have had in the past, sometimes a board member that takes actions that are just, contrary to the rest of the board, and is undermining the board, doing something, I call it lashing out. Keep in mind that usually that's occurring because of it's a symptom that the board's not operating the way it should be. It's not always that this person is, just a bad person. It may be that they're not getting what they need out of the board. So anyhow, it's just, you need to be insightful about these things. And again, you go back to the principle that most everybody, maybe not everybody, but almost everybody is here because they want to see improvements. So you're here for a common reason. You have enough other legal issues that can keep me occupied. The community suffers because then the board doesn't deal with the issues, but it gets sidetracked on personal issues, right? You kind of ignore the big issues and deal with kind of the petty things. So the other thing that can happen is very important here. I talked about culture. And so if there's a lot of petty talk on the board, personal attacks, that kind of stuff, it's not going to go well with the general manager and with staff. It's hard for them to kind of work under those kind of situations. And so you may lose staff. You may find that it's harder to recruit. I represented a fire district where the board was so dysfunctional. They kept going through fire chief after fire chief, and they went on a nationwide search, and the recruiting agency said, you guys are kind of out of luck here. I can't find a good quality fire chief. And this is not an agency that paid a small sum of money. It paid very healthy wages. So it wasn't the money. It was that nobody wanted to work in those, under that situation. So that's one of the worst things that can happen. Understand that consensus on issues is rare, but it is something to strive for. It is, I would say, probably one of the most satisfying things when you do reach consensus on the board about an issue. And frankly, it causes members to lose interest and satisfaction if there's a bunch of conflict on the board and you want to recruit good people to serve on the board. So efforts to build a strong board have to be continuous. You can't come to a session like this tonight and walk away and say, everything's going to be great, nothing more to do. You look at the picture here, people are going to the gym, but what are they doing? They're not taking the stairs. Does that make any sense? I mean, they're going to work out, but they're not going to, I'm not going to work out until I get inside the door, not a moment before. So tonight, if you think that there is room for improvement and that we ought to spend some time doing that, you have to think about it more than just tonight. You can't just put this presentation in the shelf and say we're good to go. It has to be continuous. When you're talking with members of the community, when you're on social media, keep kind of your role as a director in mind all the time. So a suggestion for the board that I have is, there's been a change as was already mentioned here tonight, there's been a change in the board. That happens. Sudden Valley's been through a number of changes in the past. Probably will always do that. But you can make an investment now to strengthen the board so that you can move forward positively and accomplish the things that you need to accomplish. There are some big issues here at Sudden Valley, some big things you got to tackle. They're not going to be easy, and you need a strong board and you need a strong team with the general manager and her staff. One thing that you can do that I like to see, I've done this with public agencies and with HOAs, is there are consultants who work with boards and understand what is going on. They talk with people individually and then they work together as a group. That kind of stuff takes time and it takes money. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It really takes an investment, but you can do that work, that hard work. And in the long run, you won't be spending money on me. You might spend some money up front, but it's, like I said, it's an investment. And it's an investment in the community because the community benefits when the board works well. And, you avoid lost productivity and morale issues and that kind of thing. So think about that as maybe something to do at some point if you feel like you need that. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about some best practices, governance versus management. And governance is what the board does. If you focus on governance as opposed to management, you're going to be much more effective. That means you tackle the policy issues, the big ticket issues. If you do that, you will preserve the political bank account of the association. And I'll discuss that in more detail. But for now, just put a pin in that really does improve the political bank account. So I assume that each of you are either employed or have a hobby or interest outside of Sudden Valley. Is that true? Okay, great.
Oh, yeah.
I figured that. So you have limited time here. You don't have a meeting every week. Your time here is very valuable. It's valuable to Joanne as the general manager and to the staff, because if you maintain your proper role as governing the association and providing direction, that's very valuable to the general manager who wants that direction. Find that you are the leaders. And so this picture at the bottom, anybody remember where this is from? Remember E.F. Hutton? When E.F. Hutton talks, people listen. Yeah. Yeah, the same way with the board. When the board talks, the community listens, all right? So they may not be here tonight, but they're listening. And believe me, what you say here and what happens will get on social media. So the community knows. Okay, so C. Northcote Parkinson was a professor in British Columbia up in the town of Stevenson, just across the border. And he came up with a law of triviality, which is useful for boards. His basic law was work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. This happens to me all the time. If I have 2 hours to do something and something should take a half hour, it'll take me 2 hours. It's just the way it is. If you set aside 3 hours for a board meeting, you are going to fill up that 3 hours, right? Most of the time. But the corollary of that is, and this is the interesting part, the time spent on any item of the agenda will be in inverse proportion to the dollar sum involved. Has that ever happened here at Sudden Valley? Joanne laughed. It happens everywhere. It's not just here. But so here's the example that Parkinson gave. Hypothetical board was faced with 3 issues on the agenda for the evening. The first one was approval of a nuclear reactor. The second one was approval of a bike shed. And the third was the nourishment or the coffee and snacks that were to be served at a board meeting. Well, the first issue took all of about 10 minutes because, well, heck, they'd had consultants come in and they had this big fancy report. And nobody knew what the heck they were talking about anyhow. So that was an easy issue. It took about 10 minutes. Then they moved on to the bike shed. And they had one guy on the board who was a construction worker and knew about materials used in bike sheds, whether it should be galvanized, whether, all this kind of stuff. Everybody knew a little bit about bike sheds. How many of these stanchions should we have? Everybody had an opinion. And that ended up taking 30 minutes. But when they got to coffee, the type of coffee that should be served, everybody knew coffee because everybody drank it, everybody prepared it, they all had an opinion. Took an hour and they gave staff direction to go do more research and come back with a recommendation. Right, don't let that happen to you. But it is true, think about that. I mean, the big issues are the ones that need to take your time, not the small issues. Leave the day-to-day stuff to your staff. So recognize your role as a leader here. Don't be a spectator. And don't participate. And hello? Okay, I'm sorry. I thought my mic went out. But be a participant in the board. Do no harm. So whatever that means, it may mean, I like to go on social media, and I did do that before I was a board member, and I engaged in all these discussions, but maybe that's not the best thing now because I think that might be harmful to the association. Try and do no harm, whatever that might be. Spreading rumors is not helpful. And that often happens on social media. So don't spread rumors about the board or staff or any of that kind of stuff. And I think it's important to, if you have something that needs to be said that's important because you identify an issue that the community is talking about on social media, report that to the board first. Because what you might want to do is have a unified statement that goes out to the membership to clarify a misunderstanding or whatever the case may be. We've done that from time to time. I've recommended to the general manager, we need to get something on the website because there's people who are, up in arms about something. We need to have a statement that goes out and informs the membership. Yeah.
So you're advocating that we should have on our own website a response to other social media posts. There's like 6 social media posts or Facebook pages for Sudden Valley.
What I'm saying is if you identify that there is an issue in the community that needs to be addressed in order to either correct misinformation, which can happen on social media, or to clear up misunderstandings, or just whatever the case may be, you should speak with one voice, and that means put out something on your website as an announcement to the membership. And I have suggested that as a possibility. I mean, you are kind of a small city, and you go to any agencies that are smaller than Sun Valley with a smaller budget, and they have a public information person that does that kind of thing. That may be something you need to think about budgeting for in the future, just to be able to communicate more regularly with the membership. And because I think if you do derail these kinds of conversations that's full of misinformation, I think you can be a more effective board if you do that. But you do have to invest some money in that. Be informed. Oh, Linda, did you? Be informed. Don't come to the board meeting having not read the packet. You need to, because that just wastes everybody's time. And then when you're out in the community disseminating information about what you're doing on the board, be accurate. Keep in mind, leave things. That's what each of you said when I asked you earlier. You want them when you got here, right? And so that's what you're here to do, and help accomplish that. Govern before you manage a problem. It's tempting for people on boards, and I've served on boards before. It's tempting to get down into the weeds because those are the easier questions. The harder things are the big policy issues. It really is a lot harder, and there's no measures of success. So, but you are here to govern. And governance is done slowly and deliberately with input and after having done research on an issue. That usually is not something that has to be done urgently. As I said before, watch what you say, everybody's listening, and then consciously set philosophy, policy, and culture. So, and on culture, I'll give you an example of our firm. It used to be Schmelik, Sicken & Davis, we're now CSD, but back in the early days of Schmelik, Sicken & Davis, it was pretty much 3 shareholders and a couple of other associates. And we had staff like we do now, legal assistants. We called them secretaries back in the day. But you know, we were having problems because when we would give our staff work to do, you know, you give them a document to review and revise, you'd get this eye roll or sometimes you know, there were just things that weren't going right. Nothing was going the way it should. And we felt like staff, they weren't enjoying working at our firm. So we brought in a consultant, just like I've suggested, you know, something you could do. They talked to everybody. And then the consultant finished their work and called a meeting of the shareholders, and we got together, and the consultant said, so do you know what the problem is? What's the problem? It's you guys. You guys are not making staff part of your team. You come in, you don't say hi, you don't thank them for the work, you don't acknowledge the good work that they're doing, and they're bitter about it. And so that shows up as grumpiness. We're like, oh, wow, that's enlightening. Okay. And we made a conscious effort. And I remember it to this day. I mean, that was 20 plus years ago, but I always think about that. And I think about, you know, acknowledging the work that staff does. My assistant does something, goes the extra mile for me, I acknowledge that. I mean, it's things like that. So what I'm saying is set a culture here that is going to lead to productive work environment. Okay, so what don't you do, or what should you not do? Don't freelance. All right, you're part of a board. So, you know, I'll take an example of your staff is unionized, and it's common for members of a labor union to go to the board, individual board members who they think might be friendly to them, and say, yeah, we're having a hard time at the bargaining table, and just kind of, you know, kind of chatter about how things are going. That's freelancing. If you give them an ear, that's freelance. Same with any employee, whether they're unionized or not, who might come directly to you. They should be going to Joanne or their immediate supervisor to talk about issues. So if you engage in that kind of discussion, it's really harmful. It circumvents the chain of command. It really undermines Joanne and her staff's ability to handle personnel decisions. So don't freelance. Don't meet offline and make decisions. I talked about that already. Social media debates, I think we've covered that. I think that when there are debates that are raging on social media, I encourage Sun Valley, I encourage the board to think about issuing a statement to kind of address that issue so that you're clear with the membership, and you're showing that you're not ignoring it. You're recognizing there is something there that needs to be said, and the membership will appreciate that. Yeah.
The problem I have is most everything you see on social media is incorrect, and somebody's adamant they know the truth, and then they post it, and then it just goes crazy from there.
Why is that? Why does your community have so much misinformation?
I do not know.
We need to figure that out. I mean, that would be crucial to understanding how to address the problem. My view has been you need to speak more to the membership through announcements, whatever that may be. I don't know if that's a newsletter that goes out or if it's just you put it on your website, but the information would be there, and it's coming directly from the board or the general manager, so it should be viewed as more credible. than what they're hearing on various social media sites.
I'm just going to say I'd agree with that. The faster you,
You what?
just what you just said, I'm just agreeing with that, that the faster you address it as well before it becomes a 5-day conversation on social media. When you hear it becoming a hot topic, address it, and then people know the facts. I think that's really important.
No.
Know that sometimes when we do post announcements, because we do, I don't want to say that Joanne doesn't get on there and do stuff. There are people that are on, is getting out onto the Facebook pages. With some people in the negativity, all I can say is this, and I've learned this term and it's scary because it's one of the terms that I've learned since I've been on the board. It's called cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, and I wanted to wanted to follow up a little bit what Timmy said there with quick information coming out. When people don't have the facts and data, then they tend to want to put the puzzle together themselves without it. And then that becomes the truth. And that, you tell two friends and I'll tell two friends. And then next thing you know, there's this truth that everybody is running with.
Yeah, because I don't go on these social media sites. I don't have a very good sense, but usually the reason those discussions happen is because people are hungry for information. A story develops, somebody comes up with a theory, it takes on a life of its own. And it's sort of a symptom of the association not communicating about things and you may not know what the big issues in the community are until it gets on social media. But then I think it's important to address it in a centralized location so that the membership knows where they can go to and get the straight story.
And I'm
No, on your own. Not subject to comments or anything else. You just put out the information. Yeah.
And I've probably been part of the problem too. But I've seen this where when I was working, there was a time when we were closing some facilities and people were meeting in conference rooms and they would literally take paper and tape it to the doorway so nobody could look in and see what was going on. And then of course everybody knew, well, this is what has to be going on. They're shutting us down. They don't want us to see. And the company learned from that. It was probably the most horrible thing that they did without getting the information out. And even if it's bad news, people want news.
Yeah. Okay, again, we're talking about what not to do as a board member. So social media and runs, which is where you weigh in, I think, on these debates that are going on social media and not allowing the board to have an opportunity to kind of deal with the issue. You need to bring concerns directly to the attention of the board so the board can, it is the role of the board to deal with things of that nature. And once a decision is made, this is hard sometimes because people will get passionate about an issue and they'll be on the losing end of the vote. But it's important to respect the decision. And the board's decision is by definition correct. I once heard my partner tell somebody who said, well, how have you been the Port of Bellingham's lawyer for, at the time, I think it was 30 years. And he says, because the commission's decision is correct and I treat it as such. I respect it. Whether I disagreed with it or not is not the point. It's like, that is the decision. I'm not going to say anything negative about it. And you need to do the same thing as a board member. It's like, just realize you're a collective body. You're just one person on the board. And so you need to respect that decision. During board meetings, state your views diplomatically, be respectful of others, but your opinion means something. It's important for the rest of the board. Let others on the board know that when you compromise, because sometimes you have a position, but during the debate, you may change your mind. Let people know, yeah, okay, I hear what you're saying and that you're trusting their judgment on something. That can have a real good synergistic effect. Respect and support the decisions of the board. Once it's done, it's done. It's a board decision and deserves everybody's support, including the lawyer, the GM, and staff. Okay, let me talk a bit about the president. Okay, I'm over. So let me. Did you only give me 45 minutes? All right, I will, let me do this. I'm going to kind of breeze through this because I've been advised that I've exceeded my time limit. I want to say a couple of things that I want to leave you with. And again, this presentation will be available to you. Individual directors don't have any authority. That is a key principle. You have to act together as a group. Nobody has authority to do anything unless the board delegates to an individual director the authority to do something. All right. There is a chain of command here, and the board employs and evaluates the general manager. The general manager then is responsible for all the staff. You are not responsible for subordinate staff. That is the general manager's job. Yeah, go ahead.
As president, could I task another board member with a certain item to do?
You can. The chair has certain responsibilities like creating the agenda, interfacing with the general manager. You may get overloaded with things. You want to assign some of your tasks to other members of the board. You can do that. I would do it in a board meeting so that everybody knows that it's on the record of who's been tasked with it and what their delegation is. Yeah. One thing I want to say here about the general manager is this is your primary information source because members come in, they speak to the general manager. You expect your general manager to be an honest broker of information. That means there's good news, there's bad news, and everything in between. And that's what you want from a general manager. Just tell it like it is, and we'll deal with it as the board. Occasionally, the general manager will have a view that is different from the decision that is ultimately reached by the board. And it's their job to, I say, march off smartly after a full and fair opportunity for input. You do want their input because the general manager is the person that is interacting with the membership and has the best knowledge of what's going on. But eventually, sometimes there will be a disagreement there. Okay, now I'm just going to say a few words about this, and then I'm going to leave and let you move on to your next phase. The difference between the governor and the manager is this. You are to think about the larger long-term issues affecting the association. Once you develop a direction and we have these goals and here's what we want to accomplish, the manager should have enough information to figure out how do we reach that? What are the day-to-day things that I need to do? Do I need to engage consultants? Do I need to take these steps? Whatever it is. The manager really wants direction and feedback in the form of evaluations as well as clear guidance. And a good board will want to provide that clear direction to the manager. Because the board is dealing with the big picture, the board's going to act more slowly than the general manager. I will get a call from time to time about an emergent issue that the general manager must deal with because of its urgency. That's usually not the case with board decisions, so take your time. Let me just see if there's anything else that I need to talk about. Finally, let me just mention this. I mentioned it briefly before. You have a bank of political capital here. It's what you build up in the community as kind of the positive trust and confidence that the members give you. So when you go to them and you say, we need to levy a special assessment here because gosh, we had this major weather event and a bunch of our roads have been torn up and we didn't budget for this. The membership is going to approve that because you've built up a good bank of political capital. You can deposit into that bank. You make deposits by good governance, running your meetings well, avoiding scandals, avoiding harassment, that kind of thing. appropriate outreach. Let the membership knows what you're doing. You're upfront with them. Those will be deposits into that bank. You can forfeit what's in that political bank account though by making stupid decisions. It's not the same thing as unpopular, it's just bad decisions, things that cost the association money. It's not efficient, whatever. Poorly run meetings. Again, people are watching this. So if they see poorly run meetings, that's going to diminish their respect for the board. If you are not transparent with the membership, they learn not to trust the board. There must be things that the board is hiding. If you're freelancing out on social media and elsewhere, the board is going to view the board, or the members are going to view the board as somewhat dysfunctional. Confidentiality leaks. Those are things that, drain your political bank account. And with that, I'm going to leave unless there are any questions for me and let you move on to the next phase of tonight's agenda.
Anybody have any questions?
At least everybody's still awake.
Thank you, Rich. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being willing to send us the slides too. It's great information.
All right, that took care of the legal presentation. Next will be 5B is a parliamentary presentation by John Berg, and I believe that's via Zoom.
Yes. John, you're online.
Okay, I was allocated an hour. Do you want me to take an hour? Or do you want to take a break first?
And I
Or
can
do
see
you
you.
want
Thank
me
you for
to
joining us.
initiate my presentation?
I'll see it.
Pardon? Shall I just charge in?
We can sort of hear you.
You can't hear me very well?
It's very quiet, John.
Okay.
And now you're muted. Can you unmute?
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Barely.
Barely, yeah.
Barely. Okay, well, my microphone should be working.
Yeah, I think we can hear you. Just keep projecting.
Okay, I'll try a little louder. Okay, so Joanne gave me about 13 topics, and I'll just try to include those in my presentation. Let's see if I can do a screen share here. Okay, can you see that now?
Yes, we can see your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, good. My term on the South Kitsap School Board ended yesterday, so I'm feeling a great feeling of relief. There's two books on Robert's Rules of Order. One is the one on the left is the big book. That's 800 pages, and that has everything in it. I would recommend the president should have that. Everybody should read the second book, the Robert's Rules in Brief. That's a short book that you can read in an afternoon. And it's written by the same authors as the big book, and it references the big book. Let's see how it's just, okay. Let me just explain what Robert's Rules of Order is not. It's not a set of formal rules that slow down the business. It's not a set of dirty tricks to bully the group. Some people try to use Robert's rules to bully the group, but they're using it wrong, and if the president knows what he's doing, that can be stopped very effectively. The purpose is to balance the rights and to expedite the business. Different groups have rights. You've got the majority, you've got the minority, you've got individual members have rights, absentee members even have rights, and all of them together. And Robert's Rules is very carefully crafted. General Robert was a civil engineer. And he was brilliant. The more I study it, the more amazed I am at his brilliance. Okay, members' rights, attending meetings, speaking at meetings, making motions, voting, and having due process. Now, along with attending meetings is also the right to be notified of a meeting. So if you have a right to attend the meeting, you also have a right to be notified. And so the meeting is not valid if everyone did not have intentional notice. Okay, you've got various, and you probably had a lot of this in your legal presentation. There's a ranking of the rules that you have, and you've got your articles of incorporation, and then you've got your covenants in there, and then you've got your bylaws, and then you've got your rules of order. So Robert's Rules of Order is below the bylaws. So Robert's Rules of Order does not overrule the bylaws. The bylaws overrule Robert's Rules of Order. And there's something that you can put in there in between called special rules of order. If you want something below the bylaws, but overruling Roberts, you can create a special rule of order, basically a governance policy, where the board can say, here's where we're going to deviate from Roberts. And that's acceptable. Okay. 2/3 of all Monopoly players have never read the rules. Same thing with Robert's Rules of Order. Okay. To have a meeting, it has to be properly called. You have to have notice. You need a quorum present, which is a majority. You need a presiding officer and a secretary. If your presiding officer is not there, then your vice president would take over. If the president and vice president are not there, then the secretary or any other member can call the meeting to order, and then you would immediately elect a temporary presiding officer for that meeting. So you can still meet if the president and vice president don't show up, as long as you have a quorum. Okay, minutes. This was something that minutes record what was done, not what was said. So you don't want the minutes to include a summary of the discussion. You record main motions and how they were finally adopted. So if a motion was made and then it was amended 3 times and then adopted, the minutes do not have to talk about all of the amendments. All the minutes have to say is the motion was made by so-and-so, it was amended and adopted as follows. And then the minutes include the final motion, the final wording of the motion. You don't need to clutter up the minutes with subsidiary motions. Okay, the actual motion process, let's see. I got my checklist here. Someone seeks to be recognized by the chair. Then the chair recognizes the member. Then the member makes the motion without a debate. In other words, you don't make a speech first and then make a motion. You make your motion and then you sit down. Then you don't, I crossed out member seconds because you don't use seconds in a board of only 9 members. Then the chair states the motion and opens the debate. Says, is there any debate or are you ready for the question? And there's abbreviated rules for small boards that we'll talk about a little later. And then there's any debate. And then the chair states the motion again before the vote. That's very important. And it's a common mistake, and it is a serious mistake. Because it's the wording of the motion just before the vote that goes in the minutes, not the motion as it was originally worded. So it's very important, unless the motion is made and there's no discussion and everybody, you know, has it fresh in their mind. But if there's been any debate or any discussion, it's very important for the chair to repeat the entire motion before putting it to a vote. And then the chair announces the result of the vote. Okay, motions have different rank. This is a page from Robert's Rules. Some motions are in order and other motions are not in order. That I'm not going to get into that today. But basically, if you've got a main motion and someone has a motion to amend it, and then you want to refer it to a committee, you can't refer just the amendment to the committee. You've got to refer the main motion to the committee. It just makes sense. Okay, the role of the presiding officer. Now, I live in Kitsap County. We have a lot of military folks. So we have, it's difficult in organizations because these military guys, they don't realize the role of the presiding officer. And you might probably recognize Captain Bly and Captain Queeg of the Kane Mutiny, and Captain Morton of Mr. Roberts, I believe. Okay, we talked about balancing the rights of all these 12 people. Who's missing from this list? It's the presiding officer. He doesn't have rights and duties. He has responsibilities. The presiding officer is the servant of the board, not the master. Okay. The most important thing is to maintain order and fairness. And make sure everybody knows what's being debated and what's voted on. This goes back to repeating the motion before the vote. And also, if a motion's been amended, then repeat the motion as amended so that everybody knows exactly what it is that you're talking about. Okay, voting. The easiest way to vote is by unanimous consent. If it's a routine matter and it's not controversial, the chair simply says, is there any objection to the adoption of the motion to paint the clubhouse green? Obviously, you'll get a lot of debate on that because somebody doesn't want that color. But a routine, is there any objection to taking a 15-minute recess? Okay. I was in one meeting where they actually debated for 20 minutes whether or not to take a 20-minute debate, 20-minute recess. That was fun. Okay, a voice vote is the most common method. A show of hands or a standing vote. Now, when you're recording your minutes or meetings and they're on Zoom, and sometimes it helps to have a show of hands in addition to a voice vote, because the folks in the room may not be able to see who's voting how. You're a public body, you have constituents, and they have a right to know how their elected board members are voting. So in this case, the camera may not show whatever. A voice vote can be combined with a show of hands. A counted vote, that's pretty self-explanatory. The chair does not have to count the vote unless the chair wants to, or unless there's actually a motion adopted to count the vote. A ballot vote, a secret vote, I do not recommend that for your board because you have a constituency. If you were a public body, it would be against the law. A roll call vote is simply a recorded vote. In a roll call vote, that's the only time that you actually record in the minutes how everyone voted, if it's a roll call vote. Otherwise, you simply report the motion was adopted or the motion failed. Only if it's a roll call vote or a signed ballot. A signed ballot is similar to a roll call vote, except you can't change your mind. With a roll call vote, you can change your mind after you've heard how everybody else votes. But with a signed ballot, you can't do that. Any questions on voting procedures? One of the questions, what do you do if there's a tie? If there's a tie, the motion fails. Now that raises the question of whether or not your presiding officer is voting. Now, very often the presiding officer in a larger assembly will want to maintain impartiality. In a small board, the presiding officer is actively debating just like everyone else. So there's no reason for the chair to not express his opinion.
Hey, I have a quick question for you, if you can hear me.
Yes,
Yeah, I have a question regarding the ballot vote. You recommended that we never do a secret vote,
correct.
and the reason for that?
Because you have a constituency. People elected you. And they want to know how you voted.
Oh, they want to see how each one of us voted.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Very often, the presiding officer will not vote unless it makes a difference. If you're taking a voice vote or a show of hands, if the motion passes without the chair's vote, he doesn't have to vote. He or she doesn't have to vote. If it's 4-4, then the chair might want to vote. If it's 4-4 and the chair doesn't vote, then the motion fails. Some people think, oh, well, if it's a tie vote, you didn't make a decision. Yes, you did make a decision. The motion failed. Because it takes a majority, which is more than half, to pass something. Any question on tie votes? Okay. Point of order. A point of order stops the meeting. If someone raises a point of order, the meeting stops and the chair says, please state your point of order. Okay? You can interrupt the speaker if necessary. A point of order means we're not following the rules. There's something wrong that needs to be corrected. You don't need to be recognized by the chair to raise a point of order. It doesn't require a second. But it does have to be made in a timely manner. You can't raise a point of order at the next meeting saying what we did last week was wrong. No, if there's an error made in the procedure, you have to raise the point of order at that time. You can't use a point of order for dilatory purposes. In other words, you can't use it just to obstruct the meeting. If somebody is doing that, you would basically rule against them, encourage them to appeal the ruling of the chair, and then the assembly would vote on whether or not to sustain the chair. And so once the assembly has given the chair the backing to shut somebody up, it usually works. Okay, point of order demands the enforcement of the rules. It requires a ruling of the chair, but the chair can refer it to the assembly. In other words, if someone raises a point of order and the chair does not want to rule on it, the chair can just refer it to the rest of the board. Say, you know, what do you think? And then you can actually debate the issue and vote on it. And that takes the pressure off the presiding officer. if it's a very controversial issue and somebody's going to appeal the decision of the chair anyway, you might as well refer it to him in the first place. Because the members are going to make the decision. Okay, so if you refer to the assembly, you handle it the same as if it was appealed. Okay, any questions on point of order? Okay. I got my little checklist here, make sure I'm covering everything. Okay, an appeal. If you disagree with the ruling of the chair, you have to appeal it. You cannot criticize a ruling of the chair unless you appeal it. At a convention of parliamentarians, I made the mistake of raising a point of order, and as soon as the chair ruled, as soon as I opened my mouth, he stopped me and said, "Do you wish to appeal the ruling of the chair?" And I sheepishly said no and sat down. An appeal has to be timely, doesn't require recognition. It does require a second, however, and it's debatable, usually. And it's the ruling that's being appealed, not the chair. In other words, it's not whether or not you're supporting the chair, it's whether or not you're supporting the ruling. Is the ruling correct? Not is the chair correct? And this is the only case where a tie sustains the chair. Any questions on appeals? Okay. Here's how it works. The chair rules that. Members, yes, but do you wish to appeal the ruling of the chair? Yes or no? And you'd say, I appeal from the decision of the chair. Okay. Boards. You're a board, right? A board is a deliberative assembly. It functions very much like a committee, but it has a distinct difference. A committee is not what's called a deliberative assembly. A committee is for discussing things. A board is for making decisions. For this reason, in a committee, you cannot move to close or limit debate, because the whole purpose of the committee is to debate something, until everybody's finished discussing it. If somebody is totally abusing that, you could take issue with it. But normally in a committee, you don't close debate. You discuss it until everybody is ready to make the decision. Whereas in a board, you can move to close debate. Okay. The board gets its authority from some other source. Basically, it's your articles of incorporation that give the board the authority. Okay. Now, there are special rules for committees and small boards, and a small board is defined as about a dozen or less. So you qualify as a small board. Now, these small board rules are not optional. They are the rules that apply to a small board. So some of them may surprise you. The rules that govern these meetings are different than in your, say, in your membership meeting. Members can raise their hand instead of standing. In other words, you don't have to stand to address the chair. There's only 9 of you there. Okay. Motions do not need to be seconded. Now, this is a big shock to a lot of boards, and I've taught a lot of boards, and they're always shocked when I tell them, "Oh, well, our auditor says our minutes have to say who seconded the motion." And I'd say, "Well, have you ever asked the auditor why?" And the auditor would say, "Well, Robert's Rules requires it." Well, I can authoritatively say Robert's Rules says, no, it doesn't require it. There's no limit to the number of times a member can speak. except appeals follow rules and motions to close or limit debate or limit the number of times a member can speak to a question are in order. So you can move to close debate, you can close to limit debate in a board, but not in a committee. Informal discussion of a subject is permitted while no motion is pending. Now, in a normal assembly, you can't have any discussion unless there's a motion on the floor. Whereas in a small board, it is appropriate to discuss an issue before a motion is made. Now, it's important for the chair to make sure that the discussion does not go on indefinitely. And it's kind of an art. The chair will say, okay, I think it's time that we narrow our discussion by getting a motion on the floor. And then hopefully someone will get a motion, and then that kind of focuses your discussion. Informal discussion may be initiated by the chair himself, which in effect enables the chairman to submit his own proposals without formally making a motion. The chair can make a motion in a small board. The chair has the right to make a motion if he wishes or she wishes. This is interesting. When a proposal is perfectly clear to all present, a vote can be taken without a motion having been introduced. Now, do you follow what that means? If it's clear to everybody to make a decision, you can have a vote without anybody making a motion to begin with. But people need to know what's going on, and it would go in the minutes as a motion. Okay, now this is interesting. In a convention, anything going to the resolutions committee, when it comes to the floor, it doesn't have to be moved and seconded because it came from the resolutions committee. Now, a business is brought before the assembly by the motion of a member. Now, a motion is a formal proposal to take some action. Okay. Now this is a way to streamline your meetings. If a motion is listed in full on the agenda, then you can treat the motion as if it's been made when you get to that point on the agenda. The chair says, next agenda item is 3.20, approval contract number 568. Is there any discussion? Do you follow what that does? That means when you put something on the agenda and you approve the agenda, you have already agreed to discuss those matters when you approve the agenda at the beginning of the meeting. So it's a waste of time to have somebody make the motion. Just put the motion on the agenda. And when you get to that point, you just open the discussion on that item. Really saves time. And that way people know what the wording of the motion is before the meeting. Okay, so everything still needs to be voted on, unless it's by unanimous consent. If it's unanimous consent, you've got to be pretty clear. If one person votes no for unanimous consent, then you have to take a regular vote. Now, unanimous consent does not mean everyone agrees. It means no one chooses to disagree. For example, if there was a motion to take a 15-minute recess, and the chair asked for unanimous consent to take a 15-minute recess, well, you may prefer a 10-minute or a 20-minute recess, but it's not worth the hassle to amend the motion to take a recess. So you simply do not object to the item by unanimous consent. Any questions on unanimous consent? Okay. You can take a vote by a show of hands. And I, like I said, I recommend that you do a show of hands and a voice vote. the same time. So everybody knows how you're voting. The chairman need not rise while putting a question to the vote. That's pretty simple. The chairman may speak in informal discussions and vote on all questions. Normally, the chair would vote along with everybody else. Okay? Let's talk about an agenda real quick, Chair. Okay, the agenda is simply the order of business, what you're going to do at the meeting. This is your normal order of business: reading and approval of the minutes, report of committees, reports, special orders, unfinished business and general orders. We don't use the term old business. Old business suggests that you're rehashing old stuff that you've already decided. Technically, unfinished business is the motion that you did not vote on when somebody adjourned the last meeting. In other words, if you're in the middle of discussing a motion and someone moves to adjourn and you adjourn the meeting, then that motion becomes unfinished business at the next meeting. But the only thing that's unfinished business or general orders would be if something was postponed. If you had a meeting, so let's postpone this to the next meeting. Okay, well, that comes under unfinished business. But you don't use unfinished business to rehash stuff. And then you get new business. Okay, is a written agenda necessary? Should it be distributed in advance, and should the agenda be adopted? Okay, a written agenda is not required, but without it, you still follow the order of business in Roberts. The chair should have the order of business. Okay, I recommend distributing the agenda in advance, particularly if you've got your motions already listed on there. But if it is distributed in advance, it's for information only and is not binding unless and until it's adopted by the assembly. Now, I believe in your case, your president prepares an agenda.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to make it clear that our bylaws require that we post the agenda in advance.
Okay, yeah. And so you can still amend the agenda at the beginning of the meeting.
Yes.
Okay, should it be adopted? You know, well, yes, because then you have when you adopt the agenda, you have agreed to discuss those items. If you put times on the agenda, then those become binding. So unless it's convention and you're running a very strict schedule, don't put times on your agenda. Okay. Agenda is adopted by a majority and 2/3 if it differs from an order of business. And I don't believe in your bylaws do not have an order of business for your board meetings. Amending the agenda requires a 2/3 vote or a vote of the entire membership, a majority of the entire membership. So at your board meetings, you typically have everyone there, I assume. It would be rare to have only 7 out of 9 there. Is that correct?
No, we frequently have people absent.
Okay. So you can amend it with the majority of the entire membership, which would be 5 people. 2/3 vote or 5 members. Okay, a consent agenda. Do you use a consent agenda?
Yes.
Okay. A consent agenda in Roberts, it's known as a consent calendar. It's the same thing. It's simply adopting a number of items with one vote, typically without debate. Now, you can debate the consent agenda unless you want to put in your rules that the consent agenda is undebatable. If you have a consent agenda, then it only takes one member to pull an item off the consent agenda. So if you've got 10 items on the consent agenda. Before you adopt the consent agenda, the chair would say, does anything need to be removed from the consent agenda? And one board member might say, well, I want item 3 removed from the consent agenda so we can discuss it and vote on it separately. So then that's taken off. Then you vote on the consent agenda, and then you address the item that was taken off the consent agenda. Okay. Typically, consent agenda is used for routine or non-controversial matters. And it's, these are just the references in Robert's rules. Engross means one or more or a series of independent resolutions or main motions dealing with different subjects offered in one motion. So it's just adopting a number of motions with one vote. A division of the question is if you've got a motion that contains 2 items that are independent, you could have it divided into 2 motions. And if they're standalone, it would only take 1 member to divide that. Okay. Let's see. Now let me see if there's anything that I did not cover. Okay, roll call. It is not necessary to have a roll call at the beginning of your meetings. Now because you've only got 9 board members, the secretary should be perfectly capable of determining who is there. And if you want that in the minutes, the secretary can record who was at the meeting. So it's not necessary to go through a roll call. It's a waste of time. Approving the agenda, we talked about that. Consent agenda. Okay. I think I've covered everything on the list. Do you have any questions? Have I lost everybody? Are you still there?
John, we do have one question. Linda, what is it?
Okay.
Okay, first question. Do minutes need to be signed by the secretary?
Yes, they need to be approved by the board.
Right, but do they, yes, they have to be approved by the board, but do they also have to be signed by the secretary?
Yes, when they're approved. They can be signed before they're approved, but they should note that they have not been approved, that they are draft minutes. Once they are approved, then they become the official record of what was done. And then they should be signed, and the date that they were approved should be noted on there. But you do
Okay,
not.
question number 2.
You don't need a motion to approve the minutes.
Are minutes kept in minute books, or are they simply saved as PDFs?
Well, Roberts talks about having them, bound in a minutes book, but that was written 125 years ago.
I think the thing that's part of the question here is sometimes we get errors where we have some of our documents stored. And as I understand it, minutes are your official record of the association. If you lose a PDF of a meeting or somehow one hasn't been attached as it should be, and you can't find those minutes, you have no official record then, correct?
Yes, I would recommend that you have a physical copy of the minutes in a file cabinet.
Okay, thank you.
You know, you could put them online, you can have your computer files and whatever, but have a place where you are physically storing the minutes
Thank you.
forever.
Anybody have any additional question?
Well, Andrew. John, thank you so much.
I'm here.
Awesome. All right.
Okay, no more questions?
Yeah. Well, Andrew, we've had
Yes.
our legal presentation and and you are next up. So perhaps you could
All
introduce
right.
us to
Well,
the group and go for it.
well, hopefully not everyone's fallen asleep yet, but I'll do my best to be brief. Hold on, let me share my screen real quick. Okay. Hi, everyone. Can you see this?
Yes, thanks.
Okay. So one thing I will need from someone at some point soon is, as the board's changed, I will need the names of everyone on the board just to provide to the directors and officers insurance carrier. Just want to go ahead and mention that and get out of the way before I forget. And Joanne or whomever can send that to me after this. That's fine. Not a huge hurry.
Great, I'll take care of that.
Thank you. So what I'll do is just go high level over the coverages you guys currently have, answer any questions, and just kind of go from there. So as an organization, you have $12,883,000 of blanket building and personal property. So that's a blanket limit you have for all of the buildings that you own and the contents within them. When compiling those limits, we have to set up separate limits for each building with the carrier, and we got to be as accurate as possible, right, on that. But they put it all together in one limit. The reason why they do that is if for some reason we're off, say, 10% on one or 15% or whatever it is, that limit would carry over to that. And the good news about that is, you know, like I said, if we're off, we'll have the coverage for those buildings, but also gives us a little leeway because, you know, although we think something's worth a certain amount, say it has a fire, and then we have to rebuild it, and there's delays in construction and additional costs and items over exceeding that limit provided, we have the additional coverage to cover that. Likewise, the probability of everything having an issue is very low, so that's why we structure it in that way. Going down the list here, and feel free to chime in if you have questions. I do tend to talk fast, so I'm trying to slow down. We have business income extra expense coverage of $1,142,282. That limit would provide anything you would need to get up and running if you had a loss. So if that's offices, if that's keeping people on payroll, if that's maintenance, whatever that would be after that loss, in addition to the property itself, you have an additional limit of coverage. And then we have the building ordinance of law coverage. So what that provides is, say a building has a fire and only half of that building was affected by that fire. You have an additional $500,000 of coverage to cover demolition costs. And in addition to it, also would cover any kind of upgrades that that building would need to be compliant with current building codes. So for example, our office on Unity is an old building, 100 years old, doesn't have an elevator, you know, doesn't have sprinklers, doesn't have any of the things the code currently requires. So if we were to have a fire, we would have to then rebuild it to the current code. So that coverage would be in addition to your property coverage to provide that to get it to those standards. The next item we have here is inland marine coverage. So this is your docks, your bulkheads, and then also we have $200,000 of coverage for the actual greens on the golf course. Next piece, we have crime coverage. So that'd be any theft, dishonesty, forgery of documents, things of that sort that would be a theft from within your facilities. Next piece is general liability. You have a $1 million occurrence limit with a $2 million annual aggregate. You also have a $15 million umbrella that sits over that we'll get to later. But I just want to mention that you have essentially $16 million for any kind of liability claim. Any questions so far? Like I said, I tend to be brief and fast, so I want to make sure everyone has a chance to ask. Okay, so the next piece of coverage we have is the commercial auto. Again, the umbrella sits on top of that coverage. So you have $1 million coverage on the underlining policy with the $15 million umbrella sits on top of that. So that's for the couple autos that you own. In addition to, if someone was to use their own vehicle on behalf of the organization, you also would have liability coverage in the event that something happens and they try to essentially sue upstream to the organization saying that that person was working for you. So as mentioned, we have a $15 million umbrella that sits on top of your auto liability, your general liability. And then also one thing that's very good is this sits on top of your directors and officers coverage as well. We have $1 million of pollution liability for the golf course only. And then we have $1 million of directors and officers coverage, which again, the $15 million umbrella sits on top of that, giving you $16 million of coverage. We do have $1 million of employment practices coverage, which would be any kind of coverage for anyone who would allege any kind of discrimination, harassment, either within your organization or someone from the outside alleging it against your organization or any contractor or anyone you hired on your behalf. So a couple definitions here. So directors and officers coverage covers wrongful acts, errors, misstatements, omissions, breach of duty of employment. This would be the entity itself, anyone on the board, anyone that works for the organization. This would pay for damages, settlements, judgments, and defense costs. Things that aren't covered are salaries, overhead, punitive damages, taxes, anything else that's not encompassed in the actual suit. Is there any questions? I know that directors and officers is typically one of the coverages the board's most concerned about, and rightfully so. So I want to make sure I answer any questions about that type of coverage. So some other definitions here that I threw in here, and I'm happy to send a copy of this, by the way. I'll send it to Joanne after this call. Claims definition, so written demand for monetary damages or non-monetary relief. So one of the things that we do see come up. Oh, go ahead.
Yes, I did have a question. How would a director get coverage? It's like how, if there's residents taking action against a board member, how do you initiate that? How does a board member use the insurance? What's the path of doing that?
So I'm going to answer this in two ways. So first would be is if there's a formal suit, right? Obviously that's the easiest way. The second piece would be is this type of coverage. So directors, officers, and employment practices. And I was kind of going to get to this is anytime you have an inkling of any type of claim, you know, besides just someone who's unhappy, right? Let us know, because this type of coverage is you want to get the carrier involved before it's too late. And the reason why is because they'll provide defense for you. And what happens is I've seen happen only a few times is where someone will try to take care of something themselves, and then they'll hire their own attorney and they start going down that road. And then they are like, well, wait, I want my insurance to cover it. And the insurance carrier is like, well, you already knew about this. You already hired someone. We're not going to pay for any of that. We'll pay for what's going forward. So then that person's out that money from that attorney. So what you want to do is at least have a conversation with, you know, myself, if you don't want to talk to the insurance carrier, which I usually recommend, because I can tell you if, you know, I think this is something we should turn in or not, what we should do going forward. But anytime you have any kind of inkling of anyone that may be doing that type of thing, like a suit or, you know, taking action, we need to have a discussion around it. Did I answer what you're asking?
The other question that I have is, in that line. So an individual can contact you directly. We don't have to go through another source.
I do not.
No, yeah, I'm your broker. So there's me, and then there's Mona on my team, who's you could also contact as well. We're always available to have those discussions.
We've got another question for you. It's like there's another mic that.
Absolutely.
If a board member feels that they need coverage or is aware of an issue, their responsibility is to bring it to the president, who will tell me about it, and then we will connect insurance to that set of people.
Yes. So if that's your procedure, we should follow it. So what I would add in addition to is if someone contacted me, you know, unbeknownst, I would probably contact the president and let them know what's going on before we offer any kind of advice.
Conversely,
Any additional questions?
I'm Andrew, this is Joanne. I'm the general manager.
Hi.
One of the stipulations of my contract is that if I'm aware of anything that could be potentially the cause of litigation against the association, it's my job to immediately identify that and call it out to the president and the executive committee. And then they're aware of it, and they can direct me to involve insurance or not, to involve our legal counsel or not.
Yeah, and I do want to kind of, I guess, go back on a statement I made, right? Is if not everything is an insurance claim, right? So if someone's just unhappy about something, you know, is the insurance the first place you may want to go? Maybe not, right? You might want to have an internal discussion. You may want to talk to your attorney to see what they think, because, you know, your attorney will know, you know, should we get the insurance involved or not? What we just don't want to see happen is you incur a bunch of attorney costs, you know, when you don't need to.
I have a question for you. What's our deductible on our insurance? I didn't see that anywhere.
Yes, I have that. Give me 1 second and I want to make sure I tell you correctly. So hold on 1 second here.
That's fine.
One of the things we learned this year is that the coverage on our equipment is for the depreciated value. It's not the repair cost. And that came into
play.
All
insurance policies on the equipment always what's called actual cash value, which is the depreciated value of that equipment. And that number is usually determined by the actuaries at the insurance carrier. With that said, it doesn't mean you can't tell them, you know, they're not offering you enough, but they usually kind of pull like equipment in the area, right? And kind of go that route to determine a number. I'm just not exiting out here.
Yeah, that wasn't really a question. It was just an observation because
comment.
Yeah, because we had an excavator, a very expensive piece of equipment that was damaged last December, and we received $23,000 in approximately in reimbursement from the insurance carrier. But then we had to stop to actually fix it because the depreciated value was lower than the cost of the repairs. It made sense for us to do that because to purchase a new tractor or whatever, that it's a giant backhoe thing, right? It's massive. And it would have cost us more to buy a new one than to fix the old one. But although we were insured, we still had a loss. That's the thing that's important to remember about this, is that there isn't a deductible, but they're not giving you the money to fix it. They're giving you its value.
Right. Unless it's, so yes. So the deductible for the D&O is $35,000. And I know that's a high deductible. That's how those policies are, because they're pretty much, you know, when you go to insurance, it's going to be a pretty, what's the word I'm looking for? Significant amount of money that it's going to cost to it.
I wonder if he can send a copy of that we could all get something to put in our
Sure. So,
binders and stuff?
yeah, Andrew, if you could send that to me, I'll distribute it to the board. That'd be appreciated.
Absolutely, not a problem.
Thank you.
I can do that right after this, so I won't forget.
Any other questions?
So I want to note that the page that we're currently looking at is pertaining to your directors and officer coverage. And the reason why I'm going to note that is because this is examples of policy exclusion. So bodily injury, property damage, fraudulent, dishonesty, criminal acts, those are all covered elsewhere on your policy. That's why they're an exclusion on your directors and officers. So bodily injury, property damage is covered under your property policy and your general liability. Just like fraud, dishonesty, criminal acts are covered under your crime. So it's not saying you don't have these coverages, it's saying it does not pertain to the directors and officers coverage. And that's pretty much it I have for a quick overview. However, I'm here to answer any additional questions.
No, I don't.
All right, so we don't have any questions. We covered the main one. So again, Andrew, thanks for coming.
Absolutely, no problem.
Excuse me. Thank you.
All right, well, if you don't need me anymore, I will go. And if anyone has any additional questions, Joanne knows how to get a hold of me. So we're good to go.
All right, thank you and have a good night.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Okay, are we on again? Yeah, okay. All right, moving on to item number 6 is committee member appointments. Do we have any committee member appointments tonight? Start out, Linda.
I have a committee member appointment of Jean Maxiner for the Document Review Committee.
GRC. Any others? What was her last name again?
It's Maxner. Am I going to spell this?
It's Stu to do it.
Hey, Stu. Excellent.
I keep messing it up all the time. I think I'm getting there.
Anyone else, Linda?
Yes, NNE has two,
Let's do, we'll take care of Linda's first for DRC. Any other DRC?
No, that will come. DRC is only a committee of 3. So I have Timey as my other board member. We are complete.
Awesome, awesome. Okay. All in favor of Jean Maxner joining DRC? Sam?
are you
Yea,
abstaining?
nay?
Good with Jean?
Jean for DRC?
Oh.
Okay, that's unanimous. Okay, Rob, you had some nominations tonight?
Yes, we do. NNE has,
Okay, good. We don't have to ratify or. Okay.
so NNE has 2 new members to the committee. We have Ray Meador, and Ray's here. Thank you, Ray, and Karen Borchert. Is on the committee.
Sorry, was that 2 candidates, Ray Meador and Karen Borchert?
Yes,
MEADOR.
Yes.
Yeah, and just who else is on your committee, Rob?
so, wait, Gail, hope you're not listening. Gail Carrillo,
Yeah, I know, right?
and I was I'm sorry, I just had a mental thing with trying to pronounce. I'm sorry, Gail, I know you're listening. And Michael Wadsworth.
Oh, and Mike. Thank you, Rob.
Welcome.
Any other
Sorry, Gail.
committee appointments tonight? Daniel, did you have, oh, I'm sorry. Did someone raise their hand over there? You're trying, we'll go to Daniel while you're coughing if you want. Daniel, did you have anyone?
I don't have that name in front of me and I haven't talked to them yet, so maybe next time.
Okay, yeah, no worries, great. Lori?
Question first.
Okay.
Our bylaws say. In the mic. Sorry, I'm so sorry. Have it away for obvious reasons. Am I on? Our current bylaws state a minimum of 5 and a maximum of 7, but that can be changed with a vote of the board. Is the board,
Bylaws can be changed by a vote of the membership.
I know, I said something, but it could be voted on by the board. So I have 8 nominations, including Sue and myself. So we have 8 so we've had 6 in addition to us who have applied the position. We had 7, one came in very late this afternoon. Do we want to table and move it to next meeting? Or do you want me to give you the names tonight? Because we can't pick all 6.
I think we should probably think about that because I'm not familiar with what exactly we have to do to change that. Are you, Joanne?
Lori's correct. The board can vote to change the number on the committee, but they can't change the bylaws themselves. That's what I was
Yeah,
confused
yeah.
about.
Yeah, thank you,
So
Joanne.
that's fine, but you would want
Struggling.
some discussion and justification of that. So I think that's what you're saying,
Yeah,
right?
so can
Lori?
we wait till next week?
Yeah.
Or you could put forward the number that is within the 7. You could put forward 5 and then put forward the other one next week.
Well, that's what
You
I,
wanted to have a meeting.
yeah, I would recommend you do that. You get as many committee members as you can
Okay.
tonight, and then we discuss adding the.
My computer ran out of battery and that was where my list was.
Okay, no worries.
Just give me a moment.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, because we need that committee up and running. Oh, and the only other thing I would say too, Lori, when you have a lot of committee members like that, it's sometimes hard to meet a quorum.
Yes.
That's just something to consider.
Mhm. Jay's that my computer ran out of batteries and that's what my list is at. Okay, so the names I had as of this morning, prior to this last submission. I have Karen Borchert, Mary Quinn, Rob Gibbs, sorry. What? Rob Gibbs,
Rob Gibbs,
Mary Quinn,
Mary Quinn,
yes.
okay.
Heather Goodman
Heather Goodman,
and Mitch Waterman.
who else is currently on your committee?
Stu, Mitchell, and myself.
Okay, so we have the names put forward for the Finance Committee: Karen Borchert, Rob Gibbs, Mary Quinn, Heather Goodman, Mitch Waterman. Any opposed? We approve. Comments, questions?
I oppose, Mitch Waterman.
Oppose who?
Mitch Waterman.
Oppose Mitch Waterman. All right, so we're going to, now we'll take a vote then on Mitch Waterman, right? We'll just do that. We have 1 opposition to Mitch, all in favor of Mitch joining the Finance Committee. 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that's approved for Mitch. The rest of the members: Karen Borchert, Rob Gibbs, Mary Quinn, Heather Goodman. Any questions, comments, concerns? Get approval for those members? Vote. 3, 4. No, you're abstaining? All?
All of them.
Okay, they've been approved. Sam has abstained. Okay, And that is the end of our meeting, so I guess he said we didn't need a motion, right? Do we need a motion for adjournment?
No, but can I make a statement, please?
Yes, please, go
I
ahead.
want to thank the general manager and our chief of staff, Kyle, for having a meeting where everybody can see the board of directors. I thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Good job, guys. Appreciate it. Right, meeting's adjourned.
Thanks, everyone. Oh.
9:41. I thought I was gonna go to 10, so.
I'll get in time all the time.